Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, at least one person is killed and dozens of students and teachers abducted from a school in northern Nigeria. The government sends in the military to try and track down the kidnapped. Also, the trial of the polarising hero of the hit film Hotel Rwanda begins in Kigali. Paul Rusesabagina is a fierce government critic, and his family says that he was abducted illegally and is being politically persecuted. And Libyans mark the decade since the revolution that ousted former dictator Muammar Gaddafi and plunged the country into violent political chaos. There are hopes that a new, hard-fought unity government will be a step towards stability. But first, at least one student was killed as gunmen abducted more than 40 people from a school in Nigeria's northern Niger state on Wednesday. 27 of those taken from the government science college Kagara were pupils, whilst others included teachers and their families. The government sent in the military to help in the rescue response. Our Sam Olukoya tells us more.
The attackers wore military uniform and also carried assault rifles. They entered the school under the cover of darkness and went to the staff quarters, where they abducted some staff and members of their families. From there, they moved to the hostel, where they chased terrified students. One student was shot dead as he tried to escape. The abducted persons were moved into a forest, and it is believed they are being held in the forest. Niger State Governor Abubakar Sani Bello has ordered the closure of the school and other schools in the state that are considered to be insecure. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has ordered the military to immediately rescue the abducted persons. Military chiefs have moved to the area to coordinate the rescue. Residents of the area said they've seen a large contingent of troops in the area. Mass abduction of school children is quite common in Nigeria. Last December, more than 300 students of the government secondary school Kankara in Katsina State were abducted. Most of the mass abductions have been carried out by the jihadist group Boko Haram and a splinter group, the Islamic State West African Province. But of recent, we've seen abductions taking place outside of the northeast Nigeria, where Boko Haram is active. This particular abduction happened in north-central Nigeria, which is outside Boko Haram territory. No group has claimed responsibility for the abduction, but it's believed that one of the armed groups in the area that have been active in abducting people and collecting money for ransom might have been responsible for this. The state governor, Abubakar Sani Bello, has said he's not ready to negotiate ransom with the abductors.
Sam Olukoya there for us. Now, the trial of Paul Rusesabagina began in Kigali on Wednesday. His supporters say that he's being politically persecuted and was illegally abducted overseas by Rwandan authorities. Kigali denies this. The former hotelier who lives in the US denies terror charges. Now, he was portrayed as a hero in the hit Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda for sheltering people during the 1994 genocide.
Nearly 1,200 people took refuge from Rwanda's 1994 genocide in Kigali's emblematic Hotel des Mille Collines. Its manager, Paul Rusesabagina, was internationally hailed a hero. Today, Kigali is keen to discredit the government critic. Passa was a receptionist at the hotel in 1994. He claims Rusesabagina's reputation is exaggerated.
Rusesabagina was using genocide victims to make business. He was robbing them of whatever money they had left. He was spending his time partying with the soldiers who were killing Tutsis outside before coming back to the hotel in the evening to party.
Rusesabagina denies Mwenanganuche's account. Outside of Rwanda, some genocide survivors still credit their lives to the hotel manager. But the government accuses Rusesabagina of treachery and has sparked a battle of narratives.
The survivors of genocide feel he's not a hero. He's a hero made in Hollywood, and he betrayed them. He sold their story to make money out of that. He's formed terrorist groups. He's funded them. And these terrorist groups have actually attacked Rwanda.
Paul Rusesabagina accuses Kagame of war crimes and is perceived as an enemy of the state. Kigali accuses him of terrorism. He was arrested by the Rwandan police last August as he was returning from Dubai.
He used his Hotel Rwanda platform to expose the human rights violations that the government of Paul Kagame and the FPR are committing today against their people. So he was abducted and taken to Rwanda by force in violation of international law.
Rusesabagina is a Belgian national. This week, the European Parliament adopted a motion calling for an international inquiry into the murky circumstances of his arrest and for him to be given a fair trial.
Well, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was amongst the first to be vaccinated on Wednesday as the country finally launched its inoculation drive. It's the first country to use Johnson & Johnson vaccines after holding off on administering AstraZeneca stock it had acquired because of concerns about that effectiveness against the dominant coronavirus strain in the country. Sam Bradpeace has more.
South Africa has become the first country in the world to begin a rollout of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Now, this is particularly important global news because the Johnson & Johnson vaccine appears to be effective against the 501YV2 strain of coronavirus. That's the strain that was discovered here in South Africa and which is particularly contagious and has now been found in dozens of countries across the world. You were right. You might remember that just last week, South Africa actually froze its vaccination rollout program. That's because it had a big reserve of AstraZeneca vaccines. Now, these AstraZeneca vaccines, there were doubts over their effectiveness in treating the 501YV2 strain, so that's why things were frozen. It's worth remembering that the South African government is prioritising frontline healthcare workers in its vaccination rollout with these new Johnson & Johnson vaccines, but the president himself also got a jab today in a televised event, which really was to send a message that these vaccines are okay, don't be scared. Now, South Africa aims to vaccinate 40 million people by the end of the year. That requires vaccinating hundreds of thousands of people a day. If there are any more freezes to the vaccine rollout or any further delays, that seems to be like it could become a particularly difficult target.
Now, Zanzibar's first vice president died on Wednesday after having been hospitalized for coronavirus for over 3 weeks. 77-year-old Saif Sharif Hamad led the semi-autonomous island's opposition for 3 decades. Despite both Zanzibar and the central Tanzanian government having denied the threat of the virus, there are growing concerns about a rise in cases and fears that Dodoma's stance is endangering lives. Now, Wednesday marked 10 years since the start of the Libyan uprising that ousted Muammar Gaddafi and sparked a decade of violent instability in the country. There were parades and fireworks in Tripoli, whilst in the east, where a rival administration to that based in the capital holds sway, commemorations were more low-key. Forces there are led by General Khalifa Haftar. His fighters attacked Tripoli last year before being pushed back. UN-backed talks led to a settlement, but much of the country remains under the influence of various militia, many of which were formed during the revolution. Now, hopes for change are now pinned on a new interim authority that was formed only this month. We're going to cross now to Catherine Norris-Trent, who is in Tripoli for us. Catherine, so the anniversary of the revolution is being marked, but is there much to celebrate?
There are massive celebrations taking place in Tripoli tonight. Thousands and thousands of people out on the streets, letting off fireworks, driving around the city. The roads are jammed, but there is a very bittersweet element to this 10th anniversary of the beginning of the Libyan uprising too. Of course, the country remains physically almost divided between east and west. The main coastal road linking Tripoli and Benghazi remains unable to be accessed, although a few flights are able to cross between the two. And there is uncertainty over the country's future as well, with the new interim administration named but yet to take any action. People out on the streets here have been telling us that they are daring to hope that this could be the start of a new chapter, but there are also a lot of people here who've lived through many years of war and conflict and are celebrating peace in the capital and letting off some steam more generally.
So you mentioned the interim government there, Catherine. You actually managed to catch up with the interim prime minister, in the crowd. So before I come back to you for a bit more about where things stand at the moment, let's have a quick listen to what he had to say.
I am the son of the people, and I wish a joyous anniversary to all the people. Today, this is a party for a united Libya, and we are a government of national unity.
So, Catherine, he sounded pretty jubilant there, but in reality, what are the chances that this new unity government will have much of an impact in terms of changing the course that the country has up to now been on?
The new interim leadership faces huge challenges and an extremely tight timescale indeed. They have to name a government within 21 days and get that approved by the House of Representatives, which is itself divided between factions in the east and west of Libya. So that's a very tough task to get them to come together and approve that. Assuming they do manage to do so, then they have basically a 10-month time frame before elections are scheduled to be held in December of this year, but Libya still has no formal constitution for going forward beyond that, and it would need reforms to electoral laws as well. That's on top of improving the security situation. A multitude of armed groups still basically are in de facto control of most of the country, and it's very fractured and factionalized indeed. And then there are day-to-day challenges for many Libyan people. So there are power cuts, there are long lines of people waiting outside banks to try and get cash to live on as food prices are spiraling. There's petrol shortages too, chronic unemployment. So a huge number of challenges for this new interim leadership to face if they can live up to some of the very high hopes here of a lot of the young people in Tripoli.
So a lot riding on that interim government. Thanks very much, Catherine Norris-Trent, there for us in Tripoli. That is all the time we have for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia, December 2010. A young fruit seller sets himself on fire. He feels ignored and abandoned by the government. His death stirs nationwide protests for democracy. It's the beginning of the Arab Spring.
We went out to protest against the regime. We didn't think we were making a revolution. But when the regime fell, we had dreams.
While Tunisians today enjoy freedom of expression, some are nostalgic for the dictatorship of President Ben Ali.
We had security, a health system, safety, and a bit of freedom.
Our reporters are in Sidi Bouzid, in a Tunisia caught between two stools. Have the achievements of the revolution met the dreams and expectations of the Tunisian people?
Sidi Bouzid Revisited, all this week here on France 24.